Anna Somerset had been working as a flight attendant for 4 years and never regretted her career choice. She lived in Canada and traveled to the US several times a week. Anna found the constant change of scenery, countries, and time zones very exciting and distracting from all of her problems. Unfortunately, she had plenty of them in her life. For example, she had been in debt for almost 5 years. She got into debt after the death of her husband, Charles. He'd passed away a week after getting an ill-fated loan. Anna couldn't say whether this was a fatal coincidence or some kind of a scam. In truth, Anna didn't know what motivated her late husband to borrow such a huge sum of money from people with criminal connections. Roberto Ramirez was one of those people. He called Anna almost every day to tell her to repay the debt faster. He also made sure to remind the widow that the longer she took to repay the debt, the higher was the interest rate. Anna cried as she tried to explain to the creditors that she had no money, asking them to give her a small respite. It was simply impossible to collect such a huge sum of money in a short amount of time. Even if Anna were to sell her house and everything she owned, the money could barely cover a quarter of what she owed. Sometimes Anna would scream and cry in despair. Charles's death unsettled Anna and forced her to reevaluate her life. Her husband was a middle-class businessman who never had a lot of money but always hoped to become rich one day. Charles continuously jumped from one endeavor to another, as a result of which he wasted not only energy but also money. At the same time, it would be inaccurate to call him a loser. Charles had a good head on his shoulders and understood business, albeit not as well as others. Despite her husband's mistakes, Anna loved him with all of her heart. In her mind, Charles was an exemplary man who needed to be cherished and appreciated. They were married for only 3 years and didn't have children. Anna struggled with being overweight. At the time of her husband's death, she weighed almost 200 pounds, which had become a source of tension in their marriage. "I think it would be great if you could start working out more," Charles said, emphasizing each word. What was strange about Charles's attitude was that Anna weighed the same when they were dating and at the time of their wedding. Lots of women in her place would have pointed this out to Charles, and probably in a not-so-friendly way. But Anna was a gentle and calm young woman who tried to avoid conflict and confrontation. "Well, Charles thinks I'm fat, so I should probably just try to lose weight," Anna thought as she chose to go on a very strict diet and enroll in a harsh fitness program. Charles did not see the result of Anna's efforts. He died in a fire in a suburban guest house. Anna knew that Charles liked to conduct business meetings in that house because the informal setting often helped the negotiations. The house was surrounded by a dense forest and had a view of a very beautiful lake. How a fire broke out in that truly heavenly place continued to remain a mystery to Anna. It just so happened that Charles was at the epicenter of the fire. It was so strong that almost nothing was left of him. Anna was working out in a gym when she heard of her husband's death. The news made her go into shock. Anna knew Charles to be a cautious and intelligent man and didn't understand what would have caused the fire. Suddenly, she became a grief-stricken widow. It took about a year for Anna to recover from such a cruel twist of fate. During that year, she managed to lose a lot of weight. It happened unintentionally. She was severely depressed and barely ate anything. At least something marginally came out of this tragedy, Anna thought sadly. Anna went through a lot before she decided to start a new life and fulfill her old dream. She dreamed of becoming a flight attendant since childhood, but for one reason or another, her dream remained unfulfilled for a very long time. Only when she was left alone with her pain, Anna realized that she needed to act more decisively. She could already speak several foreign languages pretty well, so the only thing she needed to do was take a flight attendant course and go on her first ever flight. Anna was able to go through the tough selection process and begin the flight attendant course. Words cannot express just how happy Anna felt when she boarded her first ever plane, flying from Toronto to Rio de Janeiro. She kept looking out the window and couldn't believe just how fortunate she was to be finally fulfilling an old dream. But it wasn't only the desire to conquer the skies that made Anna become a flight attendant. There was another factor at play, which was life-threatening to ignore. The money that Charles had borrowed to develop his business most likely disappeared in the fire, But that did not mean that the debt didn't have to be repaid. Only a week after Charles's death, Anna began to receive threatening calls, which became more and more cruel and sophisticated every day. Of course, Anna tried to explain to the creditors that she did not have such a large amount of money. But people with the criminal past were unlikely to be sympathetic, especially when several millions of dollars were at stake. God, why did Charles borrow such a huge amount of money? Did he really think he could increase the assets of his company by several times in just a month? Wondered Anna. To the young widow's credit, she began to pay off the debt immediately after getting a job. At the same time, Anna understood that it would take years for her to pay everything off. However, she simply did not have another choice and was forced to give up a large portion of her monthly salary to the creditors. Despite receiving stable payments from Anna, the creditors continued to bother her. They sent threatening emails and text messages and called almost every morning. All this stress had a negative effect on the young woman, who became a widow at only 27. One day, on a flight from Ottawa to New York, Anna met a nice man named Peter. Like her late husband, he was a businessman. However, unlike Charles, Peter ran his business in a transparent manner and never got into big debts. As soon as they met, Anna and Peter felt a strong attraction towards each other, which happens only between people with common interests and habits. Still, the romance between Anna and Peter surprised even themselves. After all, the flight attendant and the businessman were nothing more than good friends at first. Peter turned out to be a good boyfriend who did his best to surround Anna with care and attention. Of course, it was still too early to talk about marriage. Anna was still dealing with a lot of stress related to her husband's death and debt. Not a day went by without her thinking about Charles, who ended up treating her so cruelly. After all, if he hadn't taken out that ill-fated loan, then perhaps everything in their life would have turned out completely differently. Deep down, Anna suspected that Charles's death had something to do with the large sum of money in his possession, which could have attracted all kinds of robbers. As surprising as it might be, Anna chose not to tell Peter about all the problems that she inherited from her late husband. She felt uncomfortable complaining and burdening others with her troubles. Peter, however, was a smart and insightful man and noticed that Anna became gloomy and lost in her thoughts from time to time. Not knowing the true cause behind Anna's sadness, Peter came up with all kinds of theories and scenarios in his head. In the end, he got tired of imagining the different possibilities and decided to wait for Anna to tell him the truth when she was ready. It's hard to say how long Peter would have continued to be ignorant if a very strange thing had not happened to Anna. One day in May, she was flying from Toronto to Miami. Anna liked taking flights to that part of the States when the gentle sun greeted you immediately after getting off the plane. Before getting a job as a flight attendant, Anna had never been to that part of the country or even seen the ocean. She really wanted to go to a resort in Miami, but Charles always found an excuse not to do it. It just so happened that before landing in Miami, there was a lot of turbulence. The plane shook violently, causing the passengers to panic and demand an explanation. Anna did not feel at ease in those kinds of situations, but she was not allowed to show fear or concern in front of the passengers. Therefore, she put on a calm and confident expression as she walked up the aisle, telling each passenger to fasten their seatbelt and remain calm. Anna knew that in a little while the plane would leave the turbulent zone and everything would return to normal. The flight attendant had full trust in the pilot, whom she knew to be a true professional in his field. As Anna approached the next passenger, she advised him to buckle up and remain calm, just as she had done with all the previous passengers. But when she met the eyes of the man sitting in front of her, she almost fainted from shock. Anna was looking at none other than her deceased husband, Charles Somerset. There could be no mistake. Looking into the man's eyes, Anna knew that she was right. At that moment, the plane shook once again, and Anna was having trouble remaining upright. This almost never happened to her, and was most likely caused by the shock of seeing her late husband. "Charles, what are you doing here?" Anna asked. Charles turned pale, after which his hand reached to loosen the knot of his tie. It was evident from the man's facial expression that he was taken by surprise and was desperately looking for a way out of the situation. In the meantime, the plane continued to experience turbulence. The vibration and shaking did not stop even for a minute. "Well, what do you have to say?" Anna exclaimed indignantly. She could no longer restrain herself and wanted to find out the truth right there and then. It took a lot of effort for Charles to pull himself together and look his ex-wife in the eye. "You've really changed for the better. You look so slender and pretty," Charles said, trying to smooth things over with a compliment. But Anna would no longer fall for his tricks. After her husband's fictitious death, she was forced to overcome many difficulties and was no longer the modest and trusting young woman that she was when she was married to Charles. "Don't evade my question, Charles. Why did you organize the whole circus with the debt, the burnt-down house, and everything else?" Anna asked, raising her voice. She saw fear and confusion in the man's eyes. You could tell that Charles was afraid to admit to his ex-wife that he had deceived her 5 years ago. "It was the creditors. You see, they first loaned me the money, and only then did they announce the amount of interest. And the interest rate was simply unbearable, you know? I wouldn't be able to repay it in an entire lifetime," Charles said on the verge of hysteria. "You think that I don't know about the interest rate? After all, I'm the one who's been paying off your debt for 5 years in a row. Why did you borrow such a huge amount of money in the first place?" Anna asked, a little calmer. She still felt angry at her ex-husband, who did not even bother to tell her that he was alive and did not need to be mourned. For 5 long years, she lived in ignorance and with the sense of guilt for not having been there besides her husband at the very crucial moment of his life. But all this time, Charles was alive and well, basking in the warm Miami sun with his new girlfriend. Charles continued babbling about how he had no other choice and was not to blame for what had happened. But Anna felt nothing but cold indifference when hearing his excuses. For 5 long years, the scoundrel enjoyed the stolen money while Anna was paying off his debts and living in constant fear that the creditors would take away not only her house, but also her life. "I beg you, don't tell anyone that you saw me, okay? I'll make sure to get the needed money and pay you back in full," Charles continued to babble. Anna smiled cunningly, letting her ex-husband know that their conversation was over, and went over to the next passenger. She could no longer hear Charles and actually didn't care about what he had to say. Upon arriving in Miami, Anna called Peter and asked if he wanted to spend a romantic evening together after her return to Toronto. Anna could not remember the last time she was in such a wonderful mood. Now that her nightmare was over, she could finally start a new life with a man whom she liked very much. Charles was one of the first passengers to get off the plane, running out as soon as the doors opened in Miami. Anna knew that he was unlikely to repay her, and that he was most likely lying. She had her own ideas about what to do next. After she invited Peter for a romantic evening, she made another call. Roberto Ramirez did not expect to hear what Anna had to say. "Are you sure? After all, we looked for Charles all over the country, but he seemed to have disappeared into thin air," exclaimed the visitor. "Yes, there's no doubt. He's living in Miami. It's possible that he's living under a different name, but he's definitely there," Anna said in a matter-of-fact way. Robert was thinking. Anna's words definitely made sense. As a businessman with a criminal past, he knew that it was too much of a coincidence for a person to disappear with such a large amount of money in a fire that started for seemingly no reason. Therefore, Roberto believed Anna and decided to commit to finding Charles with perseverance and zeal. If it turns out to be true, then Charles will be responsible for repaying the debt. "We will return to you all the money that you have transferred over to us the past 5 years. Our reputation is very important to us, and we will never harm an innocent person," added Roberto. Anna shook her head in disbelief and hung up. Frankly, she did not believe that Roberto would return her the money. However, all that didn't matter. She was looking forward to a romantic dinner with Peter. She suspected that he'd been wanting to propose for some time. As for Charles, he would have to explain his mysterious disappearance to the creditors and repay his debt with interest, which had almost doubled in the 5 years. Anna was right, and Peter ended up proposing during their dinner. Anna said yes, and only a month later, she found herself standing at the altar in a beautiful wedding dress, holding Peter's hand. What was most amazing was that Roberto Ramirez kept his promise and returned her all the money that she had paid. "The wedding gift has been transferred. We'll spend it on our honeymoon in Miami," Anna said as she smiled and hugged her new husband. Since their meeting on the plane, Anna had never again seen Charles, but she was sure that her deceitful ex had repaid his debt in full.